Times claims the helicopter flew outside an approved flight path and there were staffing irregularities in air traffic control at Reagan National Airport, with one controller reportedly juggling two jobs, planes and helicopters, at the same time. Posting on his Truth social media platform this evening, US President Donald Trump has said the Black Hawk helicopter was flying too high by a lot. And if you're thinking about stocking up your wine cellar, then get on with it because prices will rise tomorrow. Alcohol tax itself will rise in line with the retail price index at 3.6%. But a new tax on wines and spirits based on strength comes in at the same time. This means the duty on a bottle of gin will rise by 32 pence and wine will increase by 54 pence. However, in some relief to drinkers, duty on pints poured in pubs will be cut by 1.7%. Those are the latest GB News headlines. For now, more from me in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to news alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome to Dewbs & Co with me, Miriam Cates, and joining me until 7 o'clock, I've got my panel, writer and political commentator Alex Dean and Labour activist Chris Worrell. And please, as always, do get your views in. Let me know what you think about Brexit and all the other topics we're going to be discussing tonight. gbnews.com/your-say. Now, in the last hour, we received reaction from the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson on the 5th anniversary of Brexit. He's told GB News the following. Don't listen to the pessimists and the knockers. From delivering the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe to cutting VAT on tampons to free trade deals, Brexit is already proving its worth. Now is not the time to drift back into the clutches of Brussels, as Starmer is proposing. The Eurozone is stagnant and Germany has had 2 years of negative growth. Now is the time to double down on Brexit and take advantage of our freedoms, from AI to gene editing to financial services. We need a government that really believes in Brexit, and we need the British ruling class finally to match the bravery and imagination of the 17.4 million people who voted to leave. Viva Brexit! A very Boris Johnson statement there. Alex, let's start with you. Would you have expected him to say anything else?
No, I was hoping you would say something in a different way. We debated whether you should do the impression, and you wimped out. You wimped out. I really was expecting a full-blown sort of Boris impression when you were reading that, which I would have added greatly to the gaiety of nations had you done it. Miriam, I think he is right. There is no point in leaving the Europe on any view, whatever your view of Brexit is and was. There's no point in leaving the EU if you don't diverge, if you don't seek to take a different path. Because if you're just going to leave the Union but follow all the same rules slavishly, there genuinely was no point. Now that we have left, the right thing to do, whatever your view in the past was, is to pursue our own course in our own best interests. The trouble for our former Prime Minister is, many people will say, and I'm a Conservative member of the party myself, I ran for the Conservative Party at the last election. Many people will say the Conservative Party in its 14 years in government didn't do enough for their agenda, and especially on this issue, didn't deliver enough on Brexit once we'd voted to leave. The big reason that can often be pointed to is the pandemic, but many people will nevertheless say, you know, you had the opportunity and you didn't seize it.
Chris, what are your thoughts?
Well, listening to Boris Johnson sort of talking about getting Brexit done 5 years later is like someone trying to return a dodgy toaster after they've, you know, burnt the house down. It's just ludicrous. At the end of the day, there's fewer people who think Brexit has been good for anything than ever before. I think there's some of the polling out recently talks about how 4% think it's been positive for crime, 5% think it's been positive for cost of living, 6% for immigration. It's like, it's been nothing short of a disaster.
Well, but if that polling sort of attitude was right, then a major party, and I don't include the Liberal Democrats, would embrace rejoining the European Union, or at least some serious move in that direction.
Alex, hold your thoughts, because we're coming back to this shortly.
Sure.
But as we've just mentioned, 5 years ago today, under the leadership of then Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who we've just heard from, Britain embarked on a new path, leaving the European Union after 47 years of membership. Now, here's what GB News' Nigel Farage had to say 5 years ago.
I'm proud of what I've done. I've been supported by a huge number of people, and now we have a Prime Minister saying all of the right things. And I wish Boris Johnson well. If he keeps his promises, we will get a Brexit that will put us in a completely different place to the rest of Europe. We have a great future ahead of us.
That was 5 years ago, but as the 5th anniversary comes around, so too does new polling. A YouGov poll has revealed just 11% of Britons think Brexit has been more of a success than a failure. 55% now believe it was wrong for the UK to leave the EU. Now, earlier today, I spoke to the chief Brexit negotiator, Lord David Frost. Take a listen. David Frost, thank you for joining me. You, of course, shot to the national attention as the chief Brexit negotiator during those very difficult years negotiating with the EU. What were the trickiest parts of those negotiations?
Gosh, most of the most difficult bits of this negotiation were created by our own side rather than by the Europeans. And I think the point that was probably the lowest moment, you know, we've been handed this terrible inheritance, obviously, by Theresa May when Boris and I came in. And then there was a moment when the Ben Burt Surrender Act had been passed, the Supreme Court had ruled against prorogation, Angela Merkel had told us that Britain couldn't leave because of Northern Ireland, and it seemed like a really, really low point. How are we going to get out of this? And as usual, Boris bust through it by saying, raise the stakes, you know, threaten an election, threaten everything you can, and that's what happened. Brought the Irish to those talks in the Wirral, got the thing going again. So the lesson we took from that was be tough, be clear.
Amazing. And
through.
You've written quite a lot recently about how Brexit still has so much potential. We can make a lot more of the benefits. Just very briefly, what would you advise the government to do right now to make the most of the freedoms that we have had since those 5 years have gone?
So loads of things need doing. You know, we need to increase the productive capacity of the country again. We've got to get tax and spend down, junk the net zero policy, do public sector reform and get the NHS working properly, all those sort of things to get the economy going again. But we've also at the same time got to rebuild our nation. The nation's been knocked around a bit, and not just since 2016, before that. We've got to get into a situation where the government works, we can control the borders, we're spending properly on defence, we're cutting migration, we're proud again of our history, our culture, our background, we're sort of standing up for the family, we're pushing back on wokeism, all that as well. So those two things, get growing again, get producing, but also rebuild the country into what we want it to be. And those are loads and loads of things, plenty to be doing. We just need to get on with it. And unfortunately, of course, I don't think this government's going to do much
but
of it.
Lord Frost, thank you so much and happy Brexit Day. Lord Frost there. Chris, let's start with you. There were lots of predictions on both sides. The Brexiteers thought that Brexit would be the most amazing economic success. We were going to be Singapore on Thames. The Remainers thought this would be an economic disaster. Neither side's really been right, have they? It's not made an enormous amount of difference to our economy.
Well, look, I mean, instead of global Britain, we got little Britain. And, you know, the only thing that we took back control of was the inability to defend our borders. I think Boris Johnson, in the TCA agreement, removed security and foreign policy from the brief. What did that mean? Binning the Dublin Agreement, we lost an ability to easily deport and return, illegal immigrants. And since then, we've had the Boris wave. We've thousands coming up on diggies, on their Boris boats, and it was meant to be a fix, but all it's done is block people being able to be sent back. And I think we're seeing now a sort of step change in people's actual understanding of what we're looking at here. You know, we had the EU-wide returns. That was also removed. But luckily, the Labour Party is looking forward and not back on this, and I think we're going to be seeing a lot more positive steps to fix what's been broken.
Alex, this has been the catastrophic era of Brexit, hasn't it? People voted for Brexit in large part because they wanted to reduce immigration, and yet because of the new supposedly high-skilled policy, we've actually seen an influx of migration that's far higher than what we had before.
Well, hang on. I think there are three main areas, of course, discounting people who didn't vote for Brexit. The first is migration, which you've been discussing. The second is sovereignty and the ability to make our own decisions, connected to the first, of course. And the third is money. Well, on the third, we've definitely had a victory, because our gross contribution as a percentage of the EU budget now would be circa £24 billion a year, which net after the rebate and spending into the UK would be somewhere between 14 to 16 billion pounds. We've had that every single year since we left, and we'll continue to have that into the future. So it's an unambiguous success that the UK has had in one of the three main areas. You can then point to other things like customs revenue, which we used to have to give most of the customs revenue we had to the EU. Then the EU would decide, after it creamed off 25%, where it gave out the rest of the 75 across the whole union. £2-3 billion from the UK every year, so which we now get to keep ourselves instead. So on the money side, complete success. On the sovereignty side, significant lack of willingness to exercise our own decision-making processes. But we did join the Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, which I think shows real potential for the future. On the migration one, EU migration down, non-EU migration significantly up. It's within our gift to change that, to reverse it, to decide not to. We shouldn't allow it. We should decide not to have it. But it's our mistake to have done that. That's not the EU's fault. We made that mistake ourselves.
Could we, Chris, have this kind of irony where the Conservative Party said they would use Brexit to diverge from EU regulations, but absolutely didn't, and the Labour Party doesn't, in principle, want to diverge, but may end up having to in order to negotiate with Donald Trump and potential tariffs away from the EU?
Well, look, I mean, there's several issues there. I think on the economy side of the Brexit debate, yes, there's the £12 billion rebate. But when you look at the sort of businesses drowning in red tape, you're looking at £7 billion costs of additional customs administration, £10 billion in lost trade on a conservative estimate. You know, the food and agricultural sector's got another £3 billion of, vetting requirements and all sorts of other nonsense. Manufacturers hit with duplication of, regulatory, red tape.
And yet trade as a whole has not changed much. It's certainly followed similar trajectories to other similar European countries. I mean, it's up 11% in total since 2016.
It's not been. Our exports have been dropped by about 30% for goods. Yes, they've gone up for services. Maybe there are public affairs companies that are doing better out of the red tape. But other than that, the main thing about what Labour's going to be doing is fixing. We're going to be having. David Lammy's out there negotiating now 6 monthly meetings on foreign policy with the EU, and it's going to be looking at how we're needing 1,000 more staff to deal with the surge on immigration. When it comes to the economy, we've got rock bands that need visas now. It's just, it's not what's been promised, and anyone that's believing that needs to give the head a wobble.
Britain's trade is up, not down. So what you said isn't true.
Well, I think the discrepancy is whether it's goods, services or total.
Not with the EU. Our percentages
I haven't got the
lower.
figures. But do let us know at home what you think. Was leaving the EU the right decision? How did you vote? Would you change your vote? Let us know. gbnews.com/your say. Well, coming up, Chancellor Rachel Reeves has set out her plans to bring economic growth to the UK. But will she succeed? And how long until we see the results? Don't go anywhere.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now, after moving to the UK from Kochi in Japan over 25 years ago, our next guest missed the taste of home and started making sushi with local ingredients.
Yes, Tomono Davies went on to establish Tomono Sushi Party, inspired by her mother's dedication to cooking fresh meals every day.
Now, while sushi is usually enjoyed in restaurants in Japan, Tomono is showing that anyone can create it at home. So here we go. She's already taught over 500 people and is now bringing her passion to even more people.
So she joins us now in the studio to give us one of her sushi masterclasses. First of all, we're a little bit nervous. We're certainly not pros. I love eating sushi, but certainly not making it.
As long as you follow my instruction, it should be that easy.
OK, great. That's what we like to hear.
So tell us a little bit about your business and why we're here today.
Of course. So my name is Tomono Davies. I'm originally from the place called Kochi, as you mentioned, and I'm the founder and the owner of Tomono Sushi Party. So we bring authentic, hands-on sushi making classes to homes, offices in London and home counties. Also, we run public classes, the information which you can find on my website.
Yep.
So this goes all the way back in 90s, actually, when I was a student.
Never.
The Japanese food wasn't widely available, but I really craved a beautiful aromatic aged sushi,
Yep.
Japanese food. And when you're craving something, you started making your own at home. And I fell in love with the Englishman. He brought me back to UK. Then that's the time more people start asking me, can you teach me how to make sushi?
The People's Channel.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
It's a good point.
He's lying. I mean, maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Welcome back to Jeeves & Co with me, Miriam Cates, and keeping me company until 7 o'clock, I've got writer and political commentator Alex Dean and Labour activist Chris Worrell. And you've been getting in touch with your views, lots of views about Brexit, which we were talking about earlier on. Penny says about the poll that suggests most people regret Brexit now. Penny says, what a ridiculous poll. Of course, Brexit has not been as successful as it could have been because of all the Remainer politicians pulling out all the stops in the last 5 years to sabotage it, all in plain sight. Maggie says, I voted Leave and would do so again. We should have just walked away. Of course, we did nearly end up with a no-deal Brexit. What's Tyler? If Boris wants an absolution, he needs to come on to GB News, get serious and explain why, with a huge majority, he never delivered Brexit and severed ties with the EU. Blustering won't wash. We'll see if we can get him to come on. Well, moving on. Earlier this week, Chancellor Rachel Reeves doubled down on her claim that economic growth is the government's guiding principle, but her plans present contradictions. While advocating for planning reform and long-term infrastructure investment, including the Heathrow expansion, evidence suggests her budget may actually be slowing growth. And today, in a further blow to the Chancellor, AstraZeneca announced plans to abandon its proposed £450 million vaccine factory. And are the government's growth targets going to bring true change to the economy? Well, Alex, let's go to you first. Some of the announcements in Rachel Reeves' speech, the Heathrow expansion, the return to the Oxford-Cambridge growth arc, perhaps they were things that the Conservatives should have done. I mean, there's not much to disagree with in there.
Look, they're our government now. I campaigned against them at the last election. They won a thumping majority. I wish them well. I want them to succeed. And some of these announcements were tremendous. The trouble, so I completely support efforts like this and Heathrow expansion, YIMBY on planning. These are good things. Regeneration of Manchester's one you didn't mention, I think, is great too. But the trouble is, the Chancellor's own budget is the thing that seems to be slowing the economy down. The hike in national insurance contributions by employers is extraordinary. The imposition of an extra cost. I was thinking about it when your colleague was reading the news headlines earlier. The benefit in the cut in alcohol duty for pubs is dwarfed by the imposition of a rise in national insurance contributions by employers. So the price of your pint will go up, even though they're going to be able to claim it went down, because every pub's going to have to hike the costs to pay for their staff more. Not pay the staff more, pay the government more.
Yes.
Right? So these are the things that are slowing things down. Basically, every major employer in the UK wrote to the government and said, don't do it about the NIC's increase, and they just ploughed ahead anyway. So to me, it seems that despite these very good announcements today, right now, the biggest obstacle to growth in the UK, the Chancellor.
And of course, Chris, the other obstacle to growth is the net zero commitments. And in her speech, she said something like, we can't have growth without meeting our climate change commitments. But surely the opposite is true. The climate change commitments are now directly impeding growth. Is she setting herself up with a clash with Ed Miliband?
No, look, at the end of the day, the net zero are necessary to sort of avoid climate change and increase costs on other sectors. I think we've got to remember, though, that the Tories ultimately racked up the debt like city boys on the lash. And Rachel Reeves has come in now, you know, fixing but not beyond just balancing the books. She's got a toolbox mark competence. You know, we're seeing JLP Partners poll out today, 65% overwhelmingly positive responses from businesses to the pro-growth speech she made yesterday. 70% under Lloyd's and a KPMG survey saying that their turnovers are going to increase this year.
Can I just pick you up there on the net zero? Because how can that be true? Isn't it ironic that many people on the left, I'm not accusing you of this, many people on the left don't believe in borders on the ground, but think there are these magic borders in the atmosphere, which means that if we reduce our carbon emissions by importing from other countries, that will make the world a better place?
I mean, you know, I do believe in borders as a left-leaning individual, and I do believe in tackling climate change and just sort of, you know, want to be sort of putting ourselves in Putin's pocket. I'd rather be doing a way that we can help the environment and save our economy. At the end of the day, when we're bringing it back to Rachel Reeves, you know, the amount of projects, and I respect Alex's Dean run as a YIMBY Conservative councillor, and I'm involved with the Labour YIMBY movement, and I'm a big believer in the planning reforms, and I'm a big believer in the pro-growth agenda. But we're seeing things like getting the Environmental Agency out the way of 4,500 homes, and another 7.9 billion from the water companies to invest in fixing that. We've had the record levels, and just to bring it back to the tax point Alex made, of public investments in Harold Wilson and policing, NHS, and all the other bits like the borders that we need to fix. And I think there was a report, a survey by Durham University, 48% of people felt that those tax rises are necessary to fix the problems, while only 24% opposed them.
Miriam, look, due respect, you picked Chris up on the Green thing. You're in an impossible position. I respect you're standing up for your party and just throwing some punches, but honestly, we are paying more to service our debt now than the Greeks are. Our 30-year
payment... point is that that's a Conservative's fault for printing £400 billion during COVID.
Debt spikes with the budget. This is much higher now because... Well,
but our debt, when, I don't know, you know, obviously I'm attacking my own government, but our debt increased to 100% of GDP under the Conservatives, and that's why we're paying £100 billion of interest a year.
There is no doubt that the government faced with the pandemic did what most governments around the world did, which is...
Give out free money.
Yes, and that's exactly what they did. Yeah. In the course of the pandemic, most governments around the world lavished money in a way very rarely spent in peacetime.
I wonder why we've got inflation. Quelle surprise.
But what your party normally makes its bones on is what happened under Liz Truss, a short-term, not forced by the pandemic episode, in which we did see a spike in the cost, not of debt, but of servicing that debt, of the amount you have to pay to go into debt. The point about that is Rachel Reeves has driven those indices far higher than we ever... She absolutely has.
They have come down now,
She absolutely has.
If you look at the percentage of GDP forecasts, and this is across the G7, the debt to GDP percentage of what debt cost that's going to be made is stable. This is securonomics, stability, in action. And you can call it all you like. We're seeing America's going up. All those Germans and Japanese from a low base, that's going up. The Labour Party's UK government is offering stability, and the markets are seeing it.
Our 30-year yield on bonds is the highest rate it was since Tony Blair came to office in 1997.
Around the world.
Whoever, regardless of who is correct about the actual price of gilts today, this is the fundamental problem, the reason why we need to grow, isn't it? Because we can't stand still, because we're paying so much to service our debt. The cost of public service is going to go and grow and grow as the population ages. The fact is, if we don't grow, we're absolutely stuffed.
That's what a National Wealth Fund's going to do, the Office for Investment, all these announcements. I can't keep up with how much is going to get done. It just sounds like we're going to have a record layer for construction.
I'm all for a sovereign wealth fund when we have debt under control. When your debt is, as you say, on any view, debt over 100% of GDP and the cost of serving it's this high, you're better off putting every penny you might otherwise put into a sovereign wealth fund into closing debt.
Because you are obviously then very, very vulnerable to future changes.
You're saving pennies in a bank account while you're paying pounds on a credit card.
Private sector investments were going to get this country going again, and the amount of money that's
not going to attract any.
Well, you're attracting loads. There's announcements going all over the place. I mean, got the Oxford Cam Growth Corridor that everyone's backing. You know, we need to make sure that we're supporting that.
Well, wherever you sit on the political divide, we've all got to hope that Rachel Reeves is successful, of course. Well, coming up, why is British farmland at risk of being covered with solar panels? I bet you can't guess. Plus, shoplifting is out of control. Are we now just a country of crime? Don't go anywhere. See you after the break.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to our GB News weather update from the Met Office. As we head towards the weekend, often staying rather wet and windy to the northwest, largely dry elsewhere, and we could even see some sunshine at times. But for now, a frontal system, it's largely fizzling out across the country, but it's leaving behind a fair amount of cloud. A slight ridge of high pressure building behind this. This is where we're likely to see the clearest of skies, so turning chilly here, even possible seeing some frost by the time we reach the morning. But across a large bulk of the country, that's where the cloud is likely to stick around, and also starting to see some cloud push into the northwest, turning rather windy here as well. But most towns and cities just about staying above freezing, but in those clearer skies across rural spots, that's where we could just dip below and see that frost start to develop. So to start the weekend then across Scotland, a bit of a mix between clearer skies and also some cloud further south, so likely a chillier start across the far northeast with a risk of frost. But a change on the way, turning very windy across western parts of Scotland. Some rain just starting to move in here, similar across Northern Ireland, fair amount of cloud here, turning very windy, particularly around coasts. But plenty of clear skies across Wales, parts of the southwest, so a frost risk here. But elsewhere, quite a grey start to the weekend. But the good news is the clouds should break up nicely, allowing for some sunshine to develop, particularly across Wales, parts of the southwest. Northern parts of England should start to see some sunshine, but across the southeast staying rather cloudy for much of the day, and still very windy across the northwest. A chance we could even see some gales to the very far northwest of Scotland. Cloudier here with some drizzle starting to move through, but temperatures around about average for the beginning of February. Now Sunday, that front moves slightly more inland, so quite a damp day on offer across parts of Scotland, northern parts of England, but any rain largely petering out by the time we reach the afternoon, and plenty of sunshine across the southeast where it's been largely cloudy the last couple of days. And into the new week, still rather wet and windy across the northwest, but largely dry and bright across the southeast. That's it from me. Bye-bye.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Problems in Greater Manchester on the M60. The inside lanes closed clockwise from junction 24 to 25 from Denton Island round to Bridlington at the scene of an accident. On the Hertfordshire stretch of the M25, the anti-clockwise exit is partly blocked to junction 23 at the A1M. Recovery works underway after a lorry broke down. In Surrey, the A217, the Brighton Road at Reigate is closed just off the M25 following a spillage, or just north of Reigate to be precise. And in Kent, the M2 is still really slow towards London. From junction 6 to 5, there was an accident, the Faversham to Sittingbourne stretch, although all lanes have been reopened. And in Cornwall, to the southwest of Launceston, the A30 is blocked westbound following a serious accident involving a car and a bus. Trains are suspended between Crewe and Warrington Bank Quay on the West Coast Main Line due to signalling problems. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Miriam Cates, and keeping me company here in the studio until 7 o'clock. I've still got Alex and Chris with me. Well, moving on to some of your views. Lots of people very interested in the economy, but Ian says there was nothing in Rachel Reev's budget for working class Brits. Julie says Labour and the Tories before them are relying on immigration to get growth, but GDP per capita is falling and ordinary people are getting poorer. Well, I'm sure everybody's wishing Rachel Reeves luck in growing, but people don't seem to have all that much confidence. Now, more than 10% of farmland in England is at risk of being replaced by solar farms and newly planted trees as part of the government's mission to reach net zero. But does reducing emissions whilst slashing domestic food production make sense? Is this another blow to our hard-working farmers, or is it the ultimate self-inflicted wound? Well, let's start with you this time, Chris. We should say this is actually a consultation at this stage, isn't it, of what to do with this land. But, of course, there is the potential that some of our farmland may be taken over for solar panels, let's say.
Yeah, well, look, to meet our net zero targets, we require about 400,000 hectares. There's about 17.6 million hectares of farmland, so it's a small fraction of it, really. And there's no reason why, you know, with agrovoltaics, you can combine the two. So I think we're going to be seeing an increase in land efficiency. And also, at the end of the day, the farmers, you know, they're not the most productive to GDP, but, you know, if they do this, they can get more money. So I think £200 per acre is for wheat. But if they're doing solar panels, you get £1,000, 5 to 10, 15 for a wind turbine. So, you know, if we want to get Britain growing again, they should just get on with it.
I think the story, I think, is a bit more cynical than that. Our farmers have been told that their properties will be subject to inheritance tax. The Chancellor rushed out to assure people that, don't worry, you can use your spousal allowance, so it'll actually be 2 million, and then had to walk that back. She was wrong about her own announcement. It was, in fact, 1 million, which would capture many farms in this country. And then they were reassured by many people, the Labour Party and experts, well, don't worry, you've got the 7-year gifting permissioning, which means that as long as it's more than 7 years ago you gifted something, it won't be subject to inheritance tax. And what do we hear today from the government? They're thinking about banning the 7-year gifting. So farmers are being pushed off their land. That's the
But Chris's point is that they will actually be paid to have the solar panels.
But once upon a time, they might not have accepted whatever offer they're going to get. Now, how much more likely do you think they're going to be when they're staring down the barrel of the state taking their farms away? Of course they're going to sell up for this, because they thought they had a more secure future. Then they're told the value of their farm is going to go in death duties to the state. So they think, well, let's get out, not while the going's good, but while it's less bad than it's going to be. That's the real picture here.
But Chris, you mentioned that we need to do this for net zero targets, but isn't this just another example of how much renewable energy is actually pushing up costs? Because we're going to have to pay for the solar panels, but then also solar panels, in the summer, it's great when the sun's shining, but in the winter, they produce less than 15% of their total potential. So that's just wasted land all the way through the winter.
Well, look, you know, the UK Climate Change Committee have said that we need about 2 to 3% of the land to be used. I think the 2030 outputs, we want to treble solar. That's right. We want to double onshore wind and treble offshore. And we're putting 8.3 billion into Great British Energy. But I think the real reason here is we've got to ignore the sort of column the climate deniers. We need to be thinking about, if you're a farmer and you're going to be making £200 per acre, or you're going to be making £1,000 an acre, or even £10,000 an acre, you're going to be making money. And at the end of the day, we've seen wheat production and oil drop 20% because of the climate change issues. You know, we've had coldest winter or wettest winter on records, and then they can actually help improve the position and actually make money while doing it. No-brainer.
But the very point you just made about the diminishing ability to produce food militates against your position, because the number of solar panels you put on British farmland isn't going to change the climate environment you say is so risky. Whereas our ability to produce food sovereignty and food sustainability in our country is a real thing. The biggest thing that saw a rocketing of the price of food was Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's our ability to feed our own population at a time when we've seen the demonstration of the vulnerability of international supply chains in food. At that very time, we want to say we're going to strip 10% of our farmland away to be used for other purposes. That seems to me to be very foolish.
And isn't the problem, Chris, that as honourable as it might be to try and reduce our emissions and move to renewable energy, it's so expensive because the more renewable you have, the more backup you have to have, whether that's gas or nuclear, you have to pay for that as well. And also, it doesn't make the darndest bit of difference about global emissions, because every time we produce a solar panel, China opens a new coal power station.
Well, let's just pick up on Alex's point. Yes, it's 10% of the land, but the land use consultation framework, which is going to use some of the most sophisticated land data that we've ever had, by the way, you've got different grades of arable farmland. You've got prime farmland. That's going to be protected. That's been announced. But what they're going to be looking at is, you know, building on the AI gene editing, how we can make crops more resilient. You know, environmental stewardship can come with mitigating climate change, as well as safeguarding our food production. And at the end of the day, we haven't got an issue with self-sufficiency. We need to be ensuring that our climate change issues are not going to degrade that even further. And by doing both at the same time, making money, paying a bit more tax, I don't see why there's anyone that can get upset about it.
I just don't understand, Alex, how this is making money. I think we've got a graph that we can show you, a chart of how much money the government, so in other words, us, is going to have to invest in net zero in order to reach the 2050 target. Oh, that's not the graph I was thinking of, but it also shows how successful we've already been in reducing our emissions. I think half since...
We've reduced our emissions more than any other country in the G20. And instead of saying, well, that's a pretty positive result, let's not get too hair-shirt about the future, given that our friends in China, Russia, India are polluting at a rate of knots, and the influence of UK PLC is absolutely de minimis on the environment. Our answer is, as they are ramping up China 2 new coal stations a week, we'll birch ourselves and make life even harder. I mean, the foolishness of this kind of thing is extraordinary. We're only outdone in our foolishness by Germany, who, in the face of Fukushima, because they get a lot of tsunami in Germany, right, abandon nuclear power and then start going back to strip mining coal. OK, the Germans have outdone us in the foolishness in this stakes, but we are pretty red-hot second.
Do you think, Chris, that Labour will eventually have to row back a little on net zero? I mean, it's so unaffordably expensive, and also, you know, our manufacturing is now in terminal decline, and this is 100% the Conservatives' fault. You know, we pushed through the net zero and renewable energy. We've seen steel manufacturing almost completely collapse. Our automobile manufacturing is going downhill. Do you think Labour will have to row back on this?
No, look, at the end of the day, we're happy for us to depend on foreign gas. But God forbid we use a bit of low-grade arable farmland to make our own energy.
But when we have our own potential gas and oil, that's if we had no choice, then perhaps that's an option, but we do.
But these options provide... You know, why are we going to... We've been really good in it, let's stop being good in it. That just doesn't make sense to me. If we're going to be building things that we need to do, we can be self-sufficient and not relying...
It's sent our energy prices up to some of the highest in the developed world.
Yeah, that's why we need stable, renewable energy.
The reason the Labour Party and them will U-turn even a little bit on this isn't to do with arguments like the ones we're having in the studio tonight. It's not to do with the logic or the money. It will, if they do change course, be to do with the fact that for the first time, in a meaningful sense, the Labour Party's now got some rural MPs. And they may want to hang on to that, and they therefore may not want to see this happen to the countryside. That's the only thing that will change their minds.
Well, we'll see. Well, please stay with us, because coming up, shoplifting is now out of control, with the number of thefts hitting thousands a day amid growing reports of the abuse of shop staff. So we're going to be discussing what can we do to turn the tide on lawlessness. Stay with us.
Ready to soak up that holiday sunshine?
Won't we need some cover?
No worries. All sorted.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Often breezy across the Canary Islands and heavy showers in Tunisia and Algeria, but elsewhere it is going to be largely settled, particularly across Greece and Italy. Plenty of sunny spells here, but as we move our way westwards towards the Mediterranean, this is where we're going to find the heavy showers. These could be thundery at times. And then out to the west, high pressure largely dominating, but it is going to bring some strong winds at times across Madeira and also Tenerife, where the best of the temperatures are, and elsewhere it is going to be largely settled into next week.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Lisa, you got in touch with me and you flagged this survey because you were concerned as a parent that your child had been given this to fill out.
Yeah, I mean, my daughter came home from school, she was very confused. She was asking why somebody would want to hurt themselves if they were feeling sad or worried about something. So that led to a conversation that we had, and I actually phoned the school and asked them to send me the survey, which with a lot of pushing, they eventually did send me the survey. And when I read through it, I was just completely shocked at the content. The survey says when I'm feeling worried that maybe I should try cutting or harming myself, because it's in the survey, so that must be an option. I've tried everything else, so why not try this?
It is astonishing that some of these are young children who are perhaps being introduced to these, these abuses for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, there's a list of 17 different types of drugs, some of which I've actually never heard of myself. I mean, the wording on here is, have you ever got high from taking drugs? I mean...
And we know that some of these behaviours, self-harm, gender dysphoria, taking drugs, are psychologically contagious. Children do them because they see other children do them, or they find out about them from the internet or from surveys like this. So the idea that this is just information gathering and won't go any further than that is ridiculous. There was a similar survey in Scotland, I think, about 3 years ago, where children the same age, 11, 12, 13, were asked about their sex lives. How many times have you had sex in the last year? How did you have sex? Did you use contraception? Totally normalising underage sex. So the idea that children are just mini adults and we can confront them with all the same kind of ideas and dilemmas that adults have to face is just ridiculous.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Miriam Kate, and I've still got my panel. Writer and political commentator Alex Dean and Labour activist Chris Worrell. Now, you've been getting in touch with your views about all the topics we've been talking about. Julie says Labour and the Tories before them are relying on immigration to get growth. Oh, no, I think I've read that out already, but it's a very, very good point, Julie. Moving on to farming. So Henry Harris says, I see that 10% of farmland is to be made into solar fields and wind farms, so we can all freeze to death and starve at the same time. June says we need farmers for the extra people to feed. There was a field of solar panels that was destroyed by the storms. So they're a waste of space. Why are we making ourselves poor by this net zero? Yes, that is the point. They're quite vulnerable, I suppose, to storms. Arnie says the net zero nonsense is crippling people and the government are refusing to listen to us. Wendy says, tackling climate change, net zero, must set an example. What about tropical deforestation and the destruction of carbon-captured tropical forests for lithium for batteries? And Dave Cates, recognise that name, says that someone needs to mention that all the solar panels are made in China. Well, that's absolutely true. Now, earlier on in the show, we discussed how AstraZeneca is pulling out of its plans to build a £450 million UK vaccine manufacturing plant. Now, I just wanted to share this tweet from the former Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt. He says, this is an absolute tragedy. The government have reneged on a deal that I negotiated in 2023, and the UK has lost a factory and many jobs in one of our most promising industries. Rachel Reeves should pick up the phone to Sir Pascal Swario. If she believes in growth, short-term penny pinching cannot be the answer. Strong words there. Clearly, Jeremy Hunt negotiated the original deal when he was Chancellor. And actually, Grumpy Grandad has messaged in saying AstraZeneca pulled out, saying Labour was the reason for it, so please do point that out. I think, yes, the new government offered less money to sweeten the deal than the previous government. Anyway, we'll give you all the latest. A quick reaction on that, Chris?
Well, it clearly didn't negotiate it very well if it's fallen over at the simple blow of a straw. I mean, he can wind his neck in for all I care. He doesn't really make much difference to me.
Strong words.
You don't think someone who negotiated a deal that someone who changes is...
Should have been better than that.
But
well,
it
wouldn't have fallen over, would it, if it was a good deal?
Well, the government's offered less money than the last.
It's not his deal they're rejecting.
Well, they've been costs, like you were talking about the debt costs earlier. Now they can't afford it to incentivise as much as they did because of the other decisions they made. He's clearly fluffed it.
No, he hasn't at all.
He fluffed it.
Jeremy Hunt.
Otherwise, I would have stood up, wouldn't it?
I think Hunt's point is that as much as Reeves feels she needs to save money, this isn't the way to do it because this actually would have...
I'm sure they'll be investing in other things.
Anyway, keep your comments coming in. Now, moving on to
bluster.
Shoplifting, and I think this is a really, really important story because shoplifting now seems to be out of control. The British Retail Consortium has warned 55,000 cases a day of shoplifting are now being reported, and thieves are committing increasingly brazen acts of theft, sometimes emptying shelves in full view of customers and shop staff, which is a tactic known as kamikaze shoplifting. There are also increasing concerns with the safety of retail workers, with cases of violent abuse against them rising by 50% in the past year alone. So what's going on, and should shoplifters get instant jail time? Alex, this seems to be a shocking phenomenon. Since COVID particularly, shop thefts have gone up massively.
It is appalling, and some of those doing it are very young, which is another thing that poses difficulties for law enforcement and those seeking to stop them, because they're afraid if they intervene of what will be said and done to and about them. Where it is possible, and sometimes we've watched footage on the show over the last year, 18 months of this happening. Retail workers are very often terrified by this phenomenon. So I stress this, where possible, for their for their safety. My preferred outcome would be that other shoppers leave the shop, that retail workers lock the doors and lock themselves away somewhere safely, and you wait until the police come. And you keep doing it until people know that's what will happen. Because if you disincentivise it, that's when it'll stop. Nothing else will fix it. People aren't really afraid of being prosecuted in the end. They know that the court system's got years to go. They know they may get a slap on the wrists. But being banged up for a day, not being able to leave the shop for a day before the police come along, that might do something.
Some of these shops are experiencing 4 or 5 thefts a day. I mean, it's a great idea, but it's just impractical.
Of course, in the beginning, it's going to be incredibly hard for retailers, but it's better than being shoplifted on a permanent basis. So the first couple of times you do it, and this person is locked up in the shop, and they're basically wrecking it out of frustration and anger that you're not letting them go, I know it's going to be bad for the shop. But we've got to take some sort of action here. And it may be that we get in the end to the system where the person is fined more as a result of the damage they did to the shop and the door, trying to get out, or the state steps in to help the retailer somewhat, if that's happened, because we've asked them to do it. But it cannot go on.
Now, Chris, one of the things the government's highlighted that they are going to change is this kind of almost unwritten rule that if you steal goods of value less than £200, you will not be prosecuted. I think that was a regulation brought in 2014. They've said they're going to scrap that. But is that the problem, or is this really social change? Have we lost shame?
Look, I mean, Chris Philp, his policy when he was a policing minister was so soft. You know, he had shoplifters basically leaving a tip. I mean, we've got normal people here who have lost hope that, you know, when the police are called, that they'll come, and then the culprit will be caught, and then that person will face justice. But this shoplifting epidemic has literally stemmed from his solution of legalising crime for up to 200 quid. Funny enough, he had like 1,300 incidents a day, and his idea was citizens' arrests. That was what Chris Philp, who's now the Shadow Home Secretary, I mean, have the Tories learnt nothing? I mean, if there was, you know, Olympics for incompetence, the Tories would win gold every time. And Labour is going to be reversing that. They put, you know, we've seen £5 million invested into, you know, dealing with the sort of crackdown on shoplifting. I think they've made a specific order, taken Usdor's Freedom from Fear campaign seriously. And, you know, we're putting a lot more money, which, yes, we've had tax rises for, 13,000 more, old Bill, to be on the streets. And that comes with a neighbourhood policing guarantee that you're going to see them on the high streets, see them in the town centres, and maybe someone will pick the phone up rather than waiting for the security guard to risk his life.
Alex, just coming back to what you were saying about what the shop staff should do. When I was an MP, I visited a number of supermarkets in my constituency that were having a problem with this.
Sure.
But what they were saying is that the company policy of the supermarket that they worked for was that staff absolutely were not allowed to tackle shoplifters.
And they sometimes punish those who do.
Yeah, exactly. All they were allowed to do is say, would you like a basket for that? So, I'm serious.
But I shoplifters
isn't the problem. Yeah, exactly.
They've talked to you directly there in a way that I haven't heard, but I imagine that is the intention of that is for the staff to demonstrate to the person, I can see you. It's obvious what you're doing. So, and they're trying to find a non-confrontational way of pointing it out. But they also know that the shop worker is not allowed by company policy to physically tackle them. And these shoplifters aren't stupid. They may be too lazy to get a job, but they're not stupid, and they know that that's the company policy. It's not just that they're chancing their arm thinking they might get away with something when someone may stop them. They know the person can't. But the trouble, doesn't have to be party political all the time, Chris. No. But the other issue here isn't about the Conservative or Labour policy positions. It's the police who increasingly prefer to police like the fire brigade goes out and puts out fires. You wait until the issue and you wait until the call. Proactive policing went right out of fashion for a generation of police leaders. I'm not talking about the rank and file, who've always wanted to enforce the law and keep order in their communities. I'm talking about this generation of police leadership that preferred to have centralisation and police bureaucratically and wait until the call came to go and respond to it. And actually, community policing has a real significant, tangible effect in people's lives. Being able to see a police officer in your community matters far more than many people seem to have realised.
Chris, just very, very briefly, because we're nearly out of time, but do you think the rise in the self-checkouts has had anything to do with this? Has it made it easier to not get caught?
No, I think it's down to the shoplifting charter that the Tories put in. I think, you know, we've only seen 17% of people charged. And now, you know, where they're getting more brazen, some of these people, we're going to see assault in a retailer having its own offence. And I think the 13,000 old bill that are coming on the streets will help deal with that.
Very good.
As well as removing that £200 issue.
Well, it's been a really good show. We've got through lots and lots. We've got Lee Anderson coming up next, but I believe we have a special guest, Boris, to say goodbye.
Well, I don't know why you didn't do it yourself, Miriam, but on Brexit Day, I just wanted to say, what am I going to say? I'm going to say this, folks. Folks, I'm going to say Viva Brexit, Viva Miriam Cates, Viva GB News.
Well, it was worth waiting for, and I'm glad I didn't attempt it myself. I'm looking forward to seeing that go viral on Twitter. Thanks so much for joining me. Don't go away. We've got Lee Anderson up next. Goodbye.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. As we head towards the weekend, often staying rather wet and windy to the northwest, largely dry elsewhere, and we could even see some sunshine at times. But for now, a frontal system, it's largely fizzling out across the country, but it's leaving behind a fair amount of cloud, a slight ridge of high pressure building behind this. This is where we're likely to see the clearest of skies, so turning chilly here, even possible seeing some frost by the time we reach the morning. But across a large bulk of the country, that's where the cloud is likely to stick around, and also starting to see some cloud push into the northwest, turning rather windy here as well. But most towns and cities just about staying above freezing, but in those clearer skies across rural spots, that's where we could just dip below and see that frost start to develop. So to start the weekend then across Scotland, a bit of a mix between clearer skies and also some cloud further south, so likely a chillier start across the far northeast with a risk of frost. But a change on the way, turning very windy across western parts of Scotland. Some rain just starting to move in here. Similar across Northern Ireland, fair amount of cloud here, turning very windy, particularly around coasts. But plenty of clear skies across Wales, parts of the southwest, so a frost risk here. But elsewhere, quite a grey start to the weekend. But the good news is the clouds should break up nicely, allowing for some sunshine to develop, particularly across Wales, parts of the southwest, northern parts of England should start to see some sunshine, but across the southeast staying rather cloudy for much of the day, and still very windy across the northwest. A chance we could even see some gales to the very far northwest of Scotland. Cloudier here with some drizzle starting to move through, but temperatures around about average for the beginning of February. Now Sunday, that front moves slightly more inland, so quite a damp day on offer across parts of Scotland, northern parts of England, but any rain largely petering out by the time we reach the afternoon, and plenty of sunshine across the southeast where it's been largely cloudy the last couple of days. And into the new week, still rather wet and windy across the northwest, but largely dry and bright across the southeast. That's it from me. Bye-bye.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Problems continue in Greater Manchester on the M60. There are long clockwise queues with the inside lanes blocked off from junction 23 to 25 from the Ashton Under line. Turn off through to Brinnington at the scene of an accident. In Cheshire on the M6 northbound, one lane's closed from junction 20 to 21, just north of the M56. Just off the Lim interchange, a collision involving a couple of lorries and a van is being recovered. In Warwickshire, the M6 is down to a single lane northbound from junction 2 to 3 near Coventry following an accident. Queues back onto the M69. In Surrey, the A25, the Cromwell Road, has been closed through Redhill town centre following an accident, and trains are suspended on the West Coast mainline Crewe to Warrington Bank Quay with problems. The signals trains may divert via Manchester. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on